Donald Trump's repeated dodges about whether or not he would pardon Jeffrey Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, along with his former personal lawyer and current Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche's private meetings with Maxwell, has Democrats sounding the alarm about the potential for corruption and self-dealing and more cover-ups, frankly. In a letter, Senate Judiciary Ranking Member Dick Durban demanded answers about Blanche's meeting with Maxwell, noting that the meeting raises, quote, serious questions about the potential for a corrupt bargain. Senator Durban writes this, quote, it is highly unusual, if not unprecedented, for the Deputy Attorney General to conduct such an interview, rather than line prosecutors who are familiar with the details of the case and can more readily determine if the witness is lying. Given her documented record of lying and her desire to secure early release, there are serious concerns that Ms. Maxwell may provide false information or selectively withhold information in return for a pardon or sentence commutation. Your false claim that the meeting is the, quote, first time DOJ has reached out to Ms. Maxwell also raises questions about the Trump administration's motives. Rather than engaging in this elaborate ruse, DOJ should simply release the Epstein files, as Attorney General Bondi promised to do. This all comes amid an all-out assault on the federal judiciary by the Trump administration. Yesterday, DOJ filed a misconduct complaint against Judge James Boasberg, who repeatedly ruled against the administration's mass deportation policies. The New York Times writes this, quote, the complaint says that Judge Boasberg had told the gathering that he believed the Trump administration would, quote, disregard rulings of federal courts and trigger a constitutional crisis. His remarks, the complaint says, amounted to an attempt to improperly influence Chief Justice Roberts and have undermined the integrity and impartiality of the judiciary. Joining our coverage is Democratic Senator Dick Durban, ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Nicole.
Let's start with Donald Trump's, they were revelatory to me, I don't know if they were to you, comments today about the Epstein matter, where he chalks up his dispute with Epstein to Epstein, quote, stealing women, young women from his spa. Are you concerned, or what are your thoughts about the ongoing revelations coming from Trump himself?
Time is not on the president's side when it comes to this controversy. It's time for him to come clean, make a disclosure of the documents held by the Department of Justice. I understand some parts will be redacted to protect innocent people, perhaps for national security. But the president making these spot comments on a daily basis is not helping his cause. The American people want to know what happened, and they'd like to know from a credible source like the Department of Justice disclosure of documents.
What is your degree of confidence that some sort of pardon, I mean, how would you know if a pardon wasn't already promised to Maxwell if no transcripts are released from the Blanche-Maxwell meetings?
Do you remember a time when a presidential pardon was an issue that showed up in the last few days of a presidency and that very few people talked about it in advance? Not with this president. Pardon is a part of his daily breakfast. He gets up in the morning and I'm sure looks at a pardon list, and I don't exaggerate too much. I think he's gone too far with this when he released the January 6th rioters and insurrectionists, gave him a full unconditional pardon. I wasn't a bit surprised that Ms. Maxwell was brought into this pardon conversation as part of this unprecedented visit by the Department of Justice to her cell.
She has made a pardon or commutation a condition for testifying before Congress. Are you interested in hearing her testimony if that is indeed the condition that would have to be met?
Look at the bottom line here. She's serving 20 years for human trafficking and the exploitation of children. The prosecution has said that she was a brazen liar when she testified before the court. Now she wants to come before a House Republican committee. She wants the questions in advance. She wants immunity, and she's hinting, not so tactfully, that pardon and clemency may be her ultimate goal. If the president is foolish enough to even seriously consider giving this woman a pardon, he will pay a heavy price for it with the American people.
Thank you for your correction. She's seeking immunity, but to your point that her end goal may indeed be a pardon is the question that seems to cross the ideological divide. I wonder what your thoughts are as a senior Democrat, that Trump's own voters are more aligned with the path you're pursuing in terms of transparency around Epstein than they've probably been around any big question since Trump has been atop the Republican Party over the last 9 years.
Well, that's an important point because one of my colleagues at lunch today said this has been a Republican problem for a long time. Now it's a much bigger deal. General population in America want to know the answers to these questions. What this girlfriend who's serving 20 years for lying to the government and for sexual exploitation of minors actually was involved in, who actually went to the island, what can she tell us about that? It's not something that I thought much about until this controversy is developed. But at this point, it is a national issue and a major one.
Are there thoughts or ideas or brainstorms or conversations happening privately with Republicans? I mean, are you seeing bipartisan cooperation in terms of any interest in bringing the actual victims in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee?
You know, I haven't heard that suggestion, and I'd be very cautious before I'd endorse it. I really feel for the victims and what they went through at that stage in their life, and we've got to be sensitive to that as much as anything that we talk about here. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is complete disclosure of the documents of the Department of Justice, with few exceptions when it comes to protecting the innocent. But beyond that, that's the only way we can get to the bottom of this. This is a situation that's getting worse by the day for this president.
Before you go, I want to ask you about the attacks on Judge Boasberg from the Trump administration, a rather unfounded complaint. What is your reaction to the ongoing assault on the rule of law from this administration?
We can't be surprised that they are threatening federal judges who rule against them. The president has called them radical, left-leaning lunatics and everything you can think of. It's unheard of in the history of the United States that we've had this kind of language or attitude by an administration. But if we're going to preserve the checks and balances in our Constitution, we've got to make sure that the courts are not discredited or diminished by threats from the executive. In this situation, the thought that they would turn this man in means that they're ignoring the Constitution, which says the only recourse is impeachment. I've been through those in Congress and in the Senate. It's a serious undertaking and seldom used in the history of our country. They want to make it a regular threat from this administration. It's going to diminish our Constitution.
Senator Dick Durban, so much to talk to you about today. Thank you for being so generous with your time and joining us.
Thanks, Nicole.
Conversation. Executive editor of Deadline.com, Dominic Patton, is back. Also joining us, MSNBC columnist, author of the newsletter To the Contrary, Charlie Sykes, is here. Dominic, I've said that this is a story that is so unique in the Trump chapter of American politics and American culture, in that we're being led by Trump's base, by some of the most vocal and most prolific voices in the base, people like Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz. But in terms of the story and the revelations, some of the folks bringing it into the sharpest focus for its ludicrousness are the late night hosts who are having a moment on this story. Your thoughts?
Well, look, I think, Nicole, satire, and I've said this to you before, I think is as American as apple pie. And I think this one is truly, if you're a late night host or you're even a daytime comic host or just someone who shows up at the Improv, it kind of is a gift that keeps on giving. That clip you just showed, I mean, as Jimmy Fallon said, a simple no would have sufficed. To then say you didn't have the privilege of going to Jeffrey Epstein's sex island on his Lolita Express plane, you just muddy the water on this more and more. And I think that's really what a lot of this is this is one of those cases where the Trump White House or Trump world, they can't seem to find a way out of this. You know, one of the biggest criticisms we make of politicians over and over again is that they get stuck in a playbook and they just keep going with it until, you know, obviously it doesn't relate to reality. Their playbook has always been distraction, distraction, look over there, look what I've done here, look what I've done to get you to go somewhere else. None of it's working here. You
Dominic,
mentioned Joe Rogan. I mean, when Joe Rogan accuses you of gaslighting your own supporters, when Megyn comes you and stuff like that, you do find yourself in a place where suddenly you don't have a roadmap out of this.
Yeah. Charlie Sykes, I don't know that there are many political staffers who've lived through the searing permanence of a comedy depiction the way those of us who work for Sarah Palin lived through Tina Fey as Sarah Palin on SNL.
Right.
The thing about the depiction is it's forever. And you can debate a reporter about whether or not it's important to understand what a non-proliferation agreement is, but you cannot take on the whole of American culture when, you know, I can see Russia from my house is all that people know about your candidate. And this is, and I guess the only question I have is, does the White House realize that that's the moment they're in? Not a political scandal, but a cultural one.
I think that Donald Trump does. If we think of Donald Trump as the executive producer of American politics and culture, we're now in season 2 of this particular drama. And I think that at some level, look, Donald Trump sees the whole world as a television show, right? He understands the drama. He understands the flow. He understands the mystery and the plot twist. And right now, he can't control it, but he understands that this is far more compelling than a debate about, international trade or non-proliferation, as you say. So I don't know about the rest of the White House, but Donald Trump, sees the world through the lens of that television screen, that movie screen, and the Epstein movie just keeps getting better. And to Dominic's point about the role of humor, I mean, he made the point last week when we were on that there's a long tradition of this, and that autocrats and authoritarians have often feared that moment when people start laughing at them. Donald Trump wants people to be in awe of him. He wants people to be afraid of him. He does not want to be the butt of jokes. And that's what's happening right now.
And as if on cue, he's tweeting about the late night host right now. I'm going to sneak in a break. I'll pull that up and read it to see if there's any news anyone needs to know. If not, we'll hear from John.
Donald Trump frequently bizarre public appearances which this month have seen the president claim wrongly that his uncle know that the unbomber and rant unpromoted about the windmills on his recent trip to the UK have once again raised the question about his mental acuity. Experts say for more than a year, Trump 79 has exhibited oddity behavior at campaign events, in interviews, in the spontaneous remarks, and at press conference. The president repeatedly drifts off topics, including during a cabinet meeting this month when he spent 4 minutes talking about decoding and appears on misremembered sample fact about his government and his life. During his presidency, Joe Biden was subjected to intense speculation over his mental acuity, including from Trump. After Biden distrokes debate his mental acuity, including from Trump, after Biden distrokes debate performance in July 2024, when he repeatedly struggled to maintain his performance in June 2024, when he repeatedly maintained his trend. Biden fitness apparently led to him not running for re-election. Trump, however, has largely been saved the same examination despite example of confusion and unusual behavior that have continued throughout his second term and were on full display on his recent trip to the UK. Over the weekend, Trump, during a meeting with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, switches from the discussing immigration to saying this: the other thing I say to Europe, we will not allow a windmill to be built